Just before I left for my cross-country trip, I had a meeting with Greenstalk. Well, two meetings actually. And I met with Ashley, who happens to be the owner's daughter, and I believe the designer of the Greenstalks, as well as Susie, who's the lead gardener at Greenstalk, and they gave me some really great tips. If you didn't see my Greenstalk planter video where I talked about some of the challenges and struggles that I have with my Greenstalks and how I went about fixing those, I'm going to put that at the end of this video so you can watch that. But that video is what spawned these conversations where I could talk to them about some of these challenges, and in particular too. The first one was a watering challenge. During the summer here in Florida, it is very hard to keep things watered, and I was having some severe challenges with these brown colored green stalks right here. So what I did was I actually drilled the holes wider in the water reservoir and in the water reservoirs that live in the center of the green stalks, because it wouldn't water properly. I also did this technique where I would lift the water reservoir off and I would water the entire top tier so that it would drain into the bottom tiers as well. Well, when I had my meeting with Ashley, she gave me some really good insight. These green stalks are several years old, at least 3. Maybe 4. I can't remember exactly. Well, they had transitioned to a different watering design. Not hugely different, but it was different enough that the watering reservoir holes had this like line through the center. I believe it was like designed to try to make it like a drip irrigation to drip slowly. Unfortunately, that caused mine to get blocked and chalked up with stuff like dirt, because at the time when I got these, they didn't have these nice little trays that go over the top water reservoir that gets the leaves and stuff to keep it out of there, to keep the dirt out of there. And unfortunately, they didn't have those back then. Well, now they do, and I'm using them. But as you can see in the spot that I'm at, there's a lot of trees and leaves, and it falls into that reservoir a lot. And because those little holes had that little line through it that kind of made the holes smaller or obstructed, I had a really difficult time with watering from it. Well, she told me that they actually reverted back or changed to a new design, which is this one right here. And this does not have those lines, as you can see. It is just an open hole, and it drains a lot better. Now, that part of the experiment we are going to have to observe over a longer period of time, because I'm in the winter season and it's been raining a lot, and not like a nice afternoon rain. I am talking about huge downpours of several inches in just a few matter of hours. And so these guys I have not watered in weeks. The brown ones or these beige ones right here, which is the new design. So it's not really the right experiment time for this. But when summer comes around, we're going to take a look at these water reservoirs to see if I can actually keep them watered by just filling up the top tank rather than filling up the way that I was before. So keep that in mind so you don't miss out on that in the future. Now, the other problem I was having is I've been trying to grow strawberries in my green stalks for years. I bought bare roots, I've bought live plants, and every time I put them in, within a matter of a couple of weeks, they would all die. And I'm like, what is going on? Well, I had a really great meeting with their lead gardener, Susie. She is such a lovely person. She has, I think, 20 or more green stalks in the Greenstalk experimenting gardening that they have at the actual Greenstalk company. And she takes care of those. And so sometimes you'll see her on Instagram or Facebook talking about her different, things that she did. She did one recently with sweet potatoes, which I thought was really cool, and I'm actually going to try that this summer. But she told me that she uses exclusively Fox Farm soil with a little perlite and some fertilizer, and that her strawberries grow great with that. And so I thought, you know what? Let's test it out. Let's test out if different soils in the green stalks really make a difference. And so we're starting with 3 soils today. And it's starting from that bottom tier up to this third tier right here, where we're growing nothing but lettuce, the same variety, the same way. The only thing that's different is the soil. The bottom tier of this green stalk is Miracle Grow organic potting soil. The second middle tier here of the experiment is ProMix. Now, ProMix is a soil that I saw that lots of people in the Greenstalk community are using in their Greenstalks. I'd never used it before, and it's a little bit different. It was very interesting, but that's what I have growing in the second tier because a lot of the community said that they liked that particular soil. And then this tier right here, I'm growing the Fox Farm soil. And so I wanted to record this over a period of, I think it's been almost 2 months that I've been growing this lettuce to see how it does in the different soils. And there is an obvious winner. So we're going to start with the Miracle-Gro organic soil. I picked this one. It's a Miracle-Gro raised bed soil, although I think a potting mix would probably be better, but this is all they had at the store. And I wanted to go with a variety that was very accessible. And Miracle-Gro is extremely accessible, although I know a lot of people have feelings about whether to use Miracle-Gro or not. I'm also using 2 cups of plant tone fertilizer, and I'm going to do this same process for each one of the soils. I'm also going to be adding some perlite. This is to help with drainage because we are getting a significant amount of rain lately. So I wanted to add something that is going to help with the drainage in the soil so it doesn't become like a big soupy mess in the bottom of the tiers. I'm mixing up this soil, and the first thing that I notice is that it is very woody. There is a lot of wood mulch and chips, and I think that goes to the fact that it is a raised bed mix and not a potting mix. And it might have been better for me to have gone with a potting mix if I could have gotten my hands on some. So I'm filling up the tier with that raised bed mix, and I'm filling it all the way up to the very tippy top. I want that soil all the way to the top. And in the past, I've made the mistake of not filling it all the way to the top. And these things sink several inches over a period of time. So they are going to sink. And so you always want them at the very top. And so I'm adding the water tier here, or the water reservoir that goes in between the tiers. And I'm going to place this one on the base, and I'm going to mark it because over a period of time, you're going to forget, and I always forget. So I marked it to remember which soil was in which tier. I really didn't have a lot of good expectations for the Miracle-Gro just because of how many big wood pieces there was in it, but it did do surprisingly well. The second one was this ProMix, which, by the way, was probably the weirdest soil that I've ever used. It didn't even feel like soil. It is a compressed pack or a big block or brick that you have to, break apart. In a lot of ways, it reminded me of peat moss. It felt like peat moss. It's light, it's fluffy. There's not any wood chips or sticks or anything like that in the mix. It almost seemed to me like it was devoid of nutrients when I was putting it in, although it did have a really particular smell to it. It reminded me of my childhood. I was in love with horses as a kid, and so I spent a little bit of time in a horse barn when I was doing some riding or some riding classes, and it smells a lot like a stable. So that kind of tells me that there's some kind of fertilizer in it that's animal, and this is just a guess because I didn't look into this to confirm this, but it seemed to me like it has some sort of animal manure or some sort of fertilizer that is from an animal, which a lot of fertilizers are, but it was very strong. Now the cool thing about it was so fluffy, and because it was this compressed brick, it was much easier to carry. For someone like me who's not in the gym very often, it can be difficult to be carrying these big bags of soil around. It is not very easy for me to lift those and move them around, especially several, which I would have needed to fill all these Greenstalks that I just got. So I did the same exact process with the ProMix as I did with the Miracle-Gro, mixing in the 2 cups of perlite and 2 cups of fertilizer, and then filling the tiers all the way up to the tippy top. Then adding the water reservoir and then putting it on top of the Miracle-Gro tier, making sure that I clipped those pieces in together. That is an important part. You kind of have to press them once all that soil's in there to get them to like link into place. I also labeled it so I wouldn't forget. I was pleasantly surprised with this soil because it was very fluffy. So fluffy that I've actually decided to start using this as my seed starting mix. Now the third soil that we are testing with is Fox Farms, and there is like this cult following with Fox Farm. I mean, people love it. You know, I'm probably just being silly here, but I was like, man, I hope there's gold in this stuff because, man, it is just so popular. And so I did the same process. I used the perlite, I used the fertilizer, I mixed it up. Its texture was a little bit different and the smell was a little bit different. To me, it was very much like the soil that I have built up really well in my raised beds, that earthy, you know, smell that you get from really good nutrition soil. It was light and fluffy, kind of like the Pro Mix, but it did have a tiny bit of wood chip in it, which I don't mind. It was a very small amount. It was a very fluffy soil, very beautiful, in fact. But very heavy, and by the way, super, super expensive. It is not easy to come by in my particular area, and so I had to have it shipped to me, and it was pretty expensive. I think I paid like $38 for this one bag of soil. Now, the soil was a lot of soil. It probably would have filled up 3 tiers of these leaves that I'm growing. This isn't the original, this is the leaf. But yeah, it was pretty expensive, and I thought to myself, you know, if I do end up loving this, this is going to be, you know, a financial investment to have to make to fill all of my Greenstalks with this soil. But, you know, it didn't quite turn out like I thought. And, you know, with so many people saying that they love Fox Farm and they love the soil, the best I could come up with is, you know, it's an environment thing, it's a climate thing. And for me here in Florida, it just didn't quite do what it did for everyone else, and I'll tell you more about that later. So now that we got all of the tiers on and we got them all filled with soil, I decided to use some of that soil to fill up the next 2 tiers. I'm not going to go into this too deeply, but I wanted to give that Fox Farm a try with my strawberries that I had. These are not my new strawberries if you've been watching the channel. This is my old perennialized strawberries. This is the Chandler variety. I recently bought some Brilliance varieties, and so I put the Brilliance in another Greenstalk just because I needed to fill the rest of the tiers up. I decided to go ahead and plant these strawberries, and then right above it I ended up planting some beets. The first time, whenever you put in a Greenstalk, you need to water it really, really well. Watering each tier is probably better, but what I ended up doing is filling up the water reservoir, and then I misted each one of the tiers and pockets. So I'm using the mist setting on my hose here to mist each one of those, and it did take a couple minutes because it's not a lot of water that comes out during the mist setting, but that first time that you're planting in it, it's really good to get that entire Greenstalk nice and watered, and it will hold that water over time. If you're having fun so far learning all about this different soil that I'm using in the Greenstalk, make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss on the future of how these guys do. Because we're only at the first part of harvest time, so I'm going to watch these through the rest of the season to see how well they perform in the different soils, and you're going to want to check that out. So make sure to hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you're notified whenever I put out a new video. So now we have it all watered, we're going to actually start planting the seeds. And the way that I do my seed starting of lettuce is I take the back of a pen and I make a little indentation. And I'm using the same lettuce seed in all of these. And this is a variety that I have grown many, many times in the past, grown quite well. This is the Paris Island romaine. It does very well down here. It creates a nice loose leaf lettuce. Germination rates are great, especially with the MI Gardener varieties that I get. They have a really good germination rate. So I wanted to start out with a strong seed that I knew worked really, really well for this experiment. So once I've seeded all the tiers, I don't even put soil back over the seed. I just use the mist setting, which is going to water it, and it's also going to basically kind of move some of that soil over top the seed gently. And you can barely see here in the Fox Farm mix the little bit of seeds. And I used a lot of seeds because I wanted to make sure that I got a germination. And here is our very first winner. And this is the Miracle-Gro. It was the first one to germinate, and it germinated in like 2 or 3 days. It was actually pretty crazy how quickly these seeds came up. And I was so shocked that it was a Miracle-Gro that came up first with all those little sticks and stuff that were in the soil. The Pro Mix was actually the next one in line. You can start to see some of the seedlings poking through here. And then for the Fox Farm, this one was the last one to pop up, but it was still quite fast. It was maybe 4 or 5 days it took for them to pop up versus the 3 or 4 that it took on the other tiers. So very much within the same window of the other ones. Here we are at a week, and you can see that a lot of those seedlings popped up and they look good and they look healthy. The spot where I'm growing these plants in, or this Greenstalk in, is super shaded. It only gets about 3 or 4 hours of sun a day, which is not a lot, especially here in the winter when the sun is not quite as intense. So I knew that it was going to grow much slower, and it did grow much slower. It took a solid 60 days to get a harvestable lettuce from this Greenstalk. You can see here that the Fox Farm and the Pro Mix and the Miracle-Gro seem to have been growing at the same time or rate. Here we are at 2 weeks in, and they've gotten much longer. They've gotten a little bit leggy because of that lack of light. You can see that, but they're okay. And this is when I started to notice some differences. The Fox Farm, we're not growing at the same rate. Here we are at week 3. In fact, I think it was at this week that several of them in the Fox Farm tier actually died. I feel like it was dampening off. Like something with the Fox Farm soil got so wet and stayed wet that it never dried out. And I believe that some of the seedlings died in this tier because of dampening off. So it wasn't like super great at keeping the top dry. Here we are at the next week, and here it takes a little bit longer. Between the Miracle-Gro and the Pro Mix, I really didn't see a lot of difference in the size. I believe at one point in time, the Pro Mix did start to get a little bit bigger. You can kind of see that here if you're looking very closely. The Fox Farm lagged behind and stayed lagged behind the entire time. In the following week, it was a windy week, and these guys were getting much bigger. Some of them were harvestable at this point. Miracle-Gro was doing very well. Pro Mix was doing super well. This is when it really started to get away from the other two and get much larger leaves, but it was still pretty comparable to the Miracle-Gro. Once again, the Fox Farm is not doing great. It's not growing tall. As you can see, they're smaller, or much smaller, and there's really only one of them left now. All the rest of them had died off. Even this little guy right here, he ended up dying off by the following week. Here we are at the following week, and from here they just start to get bigger and bigger, with the Pro Mix, the one that grew the largest leaves, the Miracle-Gro growing the second largest leaves, and then the Fox Farm very stalled behind. And here's a look at all 3 of the tiers right next to each other, so you can really get an idea the difference in the size of these plants, which is quite obvious. So now that we've watched them grow, I want to talk about a little bit more of the pros and cons of the different soils. So let's talk about the pros and cons of Miracle-Gro. The pro of Miracle-Gro is it's very easy to find. I mean, you can go to any big box store, you can go to Walmart, you can go pretty much anywhere and find some Miracle-Gro soil. Whether it's the raised bed or the potting mix, it's very accessible. The other thing is it is the least expensive. It was the cheapest option. It was about $1 or $2 cheaper than the Pro Mix, and it was significantly cheaper than the Fox Farm. Now the negatives of Miracle-Gro is it's heavy to tote these bags around. It doesn't have a solid reputation. There are a lot of folks that don't like Miracle-Gro, even the Miracle-Gro Organic, because of the parent company and all those things. I haven't researched a lot into that, but if you are very selective of your soil, maybe this one isn't the one that you're interested in. So there is some of that. In terms of its growing ability and watering and you know, keeping the nutrients in and stuff. It did great. It wasn't as large as the leaves from the Pro Mix, but it was comparable. It was very, very close. So it did grow them. It's cheaper and it's easier to find. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of Pro Mix. So the pros of Pro Mix was it's not too hard to find. I found these boxes or the compressed bricks at Walmart in their garden section. If you order it online, it's actually a lot more expensive than if you just go to the store and pick it up. Other than that, I've not found them anywhere else, although one of my viewers told me that she was able to find it at Home Depot. So it is accessible. It is a little bit more expensive than the Miracle-Gro by a couple of dollars. The pros is, man, it's easy to carry. And for somebody who is constantly struggling with carrying bagged soil to fill up these guys, it was a lot easier. It is not as heavy at all. Even that compressed brick, while it is, you know, it has some weight to it, it is like peat moss. It's crazy. The other thing I really like about Pro Mix is that because it is so light and fluffy, I actually started using it as my seed starting mix. It does really well for a seed starting mix because of how fluffy and light it is. It almost seems like it's completely peat moss, but there's clearly some good nutrition and other things in it because it definitely smells like there's like some sort of animal manure in it. And it grew the plants really, really well without much help. I did put the plant tone in on all of them, but it must have had its own nutrition in there because they really grew well for a very long time. Now the Fox Farm, man, this one was interesting for me because it's just, I don't understand. Some people really, really love it, and I have not found very many pros. In fact, I can't even say that there is a pro for me. It's a decent soil. It grew plants. They're significantly smaller, so that's definitely a con. Another con is I had a significant amount of dampening off in this soil compared to the other soils, so I lost almost all my plants. This is the only plant that survived of all the pockets in that particular tier. So that's a negative. Another negative is it is incredibly expensive. $38 for one bag of soil is well outside my price range. I do know that you can find it cheaper if you buy it locally. Local for me would have been having to drive to Tampa or Ocala, which is like an hour there and like an hour back. So like 2 hours of commuting to get a bag of soil that was still on the high side of the price. So I had to have it delivered, and having it delivered made it even more expensive. Like, I couldn't justify getting this soil in the future if it didn't perform really, really well. And unfortunately, it didn't perform well. It was super heavy to carry. Even though it was delivered, I had to carry it through my house, and it was really heavy. It's a much bigger bag than the Miracle-Gro. I don't know if it's because it's fluffier, why it was so big, because they both filled the same amount of tiers. So I think it had something to do with the fluffiness, but it had much larger bags. It was much more expensive. It was really difficult to find. And honestly, I just haven't noticed a positive result with it. So for me, the loser of this challenge is the Fox Farm, which is crazy. And the winner of this challenge is Pro Mix. I liked Pro Mix so much that I ended up using it in all of my new containers. So this one is my warm weather experiment, and that one over there I'm doing strawberries with. We have Daisy, she's visiting us today. I plan on using it from here on out because it has just been so good and so easy to find. I hope you had fun hanging out with me today. Happy gardening, guys.